Good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday series. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis, and today we are honored to host a longtime activist for human rights in an international arena. David Hinkley is a Sonoma resident, and he's a founding member of Amnesty International USA, as well as a current board member. He has lectured on human rights in more than 30 universities in North America and has written a book called Stories of Solidarity and Struggle. And this is the book. Readers' books will have this book, and I highly recommend it, and you'll see why as we go through the questions today. It's about his experiences of activism in worldwide movements for human rights. He has worked to abolish the death penalty in the U.S., to defend indigenous people's rights here and abroad in Central and South America, and to free prisoners of conscience in South Korea, Indonesia, Chile, Sudan, and South Africa. Having been an activist for more than 50 years, our discussion will explore some of the methods and strategies that have defined his work. So welcome, David. It's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Georgia.
Well, before we get into the weeds of your work, I want you to tell people a little bit about your background, how you got into Amnesty International, and just your personal story. I know you were a teacher before that, so this can be
That's
brief.
right. I was born in Iowa, and my family moved to California to the peninsula in the early 50s. And I studied at Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose and Santa Clara. Then I went to some other colleges and eventually graduated from San Francisco State College, now university. And I found out about Amnesty International while I was teaching school at St. John Vianney School in East San Jose. I heard about it on the radio on my drive home. I heard Joan Baez talking about the fascist government in Greece and the systematic torture of political prisoners, and that Amnesty International was an organization that was attempting to expose and confront and put an end to that torture. It sounded very important to me. So I called the number that Joan gave on the radio station. It was KLIV, I remember. And it was Janetta Sagan's home. Janetta was a courier in the anti-fascist underground in Italy in the end of World War II. She was captured by the Germans and tortured for 45 days. And she came out of that experience just committed to a life of work for human rights to end unjust imprisonment and torture of prisoners. She was rescued herself by resistance fighters who dressed up like Nazi soldiers and removed her from the prison. But her life and her passion for human rights inspired me from the first moment I walked into her house. I found very few people there. In June of 1973, there was Janetta herself and Joan Baez and Kit Bricca, who was an organizer for the United Farm Workers, and just a few others, and myself. And I was surprised. I asked them, well, what's the best thing that happened this week? And they said, you. So it was very small in those days, in the summer of 73. And we worked on Greece and other human rights situations throughout the summer. But it was really the coup in Chile that sort of became a driving
We'll get to that later, David.
impetus. But that's the one that caused Joan to start doing concerts,
Great.
at which we organized many, many chapters of Amnesty. And that's on that basis of having organized so many chapters and started coordination groups and so on. That's why I'm considered a founder.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's great that you were the good news for the Amnesty
Yeah, I was a
International
little
small
bit
group that was.
surprised.
Yes, I realized and I'd forgotten this, that both of my brothers also went to Bellarmine. So
Uh-huh.
we've got another connection there. One hated it and left, but the other one stayed.
I
Uh,
hated it and stayed.
right. I think a lot of people felt that way. It seemed
Well,
like,
I missed the presence of girls.
oh, I see. They were pretty strict too, though. But I wanted to ask you before we get into the weeds of the work that we're going to talk about mostly is the folk schools that you wrote about and what they are, that it was kind of based on this Danish folk schools. I hadn't heard of them before I read your book, and it seems like a very interesting alternative to the normal kind of schools that most of us have gone to. And since you are a teacher, I think you would be the right person to ask about this anyway.
Yeah, they were originated in Denmark in 1830s. And the man who did that understood that you couldn't create democracy, and they were in the process of building a Danish democracy in the 19th century, unless young people were involved in the life of the nation. And he did, and so he got the establishment, the educational establishment in Denmark to have schools that set aside Latin and Greek and classical studies and looked at what was going on in the world. And that those Danish folk schools became the model for folk schools here in the United States, which grew up initially in the South. And the most famous one is the Highlander Center in Newmarket, Tennessee, near Knoxville. And I attended an anti-death penalty organizing session there, and that's how I got to know it. But it was striking to me because I studied Danish folk schools when I was preparing to teach seventh and eighth grade, and I tried to implement those principles, but I was confronted by angry parents who wanted textbook education. And so the principal caved in, and I was only able to have a few elements of that. But it was so exciting when we were doing it. We would have the kids circle and talk about the difference between justice and truth, and the difference between law and justice. And it was so fascinating to have them tell their own stories. And that I missed that when I was prohibited from organizing the classes that way. I think
That's
it's
too
a
bad.
great model.
Yeah, it sounded like it. And it's similar to the model that they use in the K through 12 educational system at the Mondragon cooperatives because they have their own educational system, much more open, teach ethics, conflict resolution. I mean, it's really how to live in the world in a respectful way. So I want to get, no, I'm going to,
Hello.
I just had to mute somebody. I want to get now to Chile, which you we were mentioning earlier. And you write about the experience in those countries for human rights and how difficult it was, especially with the coup, how difficult it was dealing when dictators are in control. And with Chile, the horrors of the Pinochet regime, which were, of course, instigated a lot by Nixon, Kissinger, and of course our CIA, that seems like coups are us. It was startling. I mean, we know a lot about it on one level, and yet none of us have been there when it was happening. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about Chile and what we should know about it that we probably don't know.
You just referred to some of the most important aspects of it, which are that it was not something that happened in isolation. Um, uh, Salvador Allende was democratically elected in Chile, and one of the first things he did was nationalize the copper mining industry, which enraged corporate copper mining interests like Anaconda and Kennecott, and also ITT, which was at the time a communications giant that depended on copper. And so these corporate cronies of Nixon and Kissinger, uh, you know, connived with the administration and the CIA to destroy the Chilean economy. They led an international boycott of Chilean goods. They directly financed a trucker strike. Chile is a country which is thousands of miles long, but not very wide, and it depends on truck traffic for its economy. And the CIA generated funds to the truckers so that they could go on strike and cripple the economy. And this was direct interference in the life of the Chilean people. And the reason was simply greed, corporate greed. They charged high prices for copper. there was never an indication that Allende intended to raise the price of copper, but they used that specter to say that the Allende regime was a Marxist threat in the Americas. There was a lot of red baiting that went on, even though he was enormously popular and loved by the Chilean people. And so when crippling the economy wasn't enough, they worked with General Augusto Pinochet and carried out a coup d'état, in which President Allende was killed. And thousands of people were interned in the soccer stadium. Countless people were tortured and caused to disappear. Over 1,800 people disappeared in just the first year of the golpe. And so it was a horrific situation. And Janetta organized a mission that was led by poet and activist Rose Styron, wife of William Styron, the author. And Rose went to Chile to investigate and also to try and get people like Orlando Letelier, who had been sent down to an island in the Chilean Antarctic, and get them out of prison. And she pretended that she was a tourist so that she could operate freely. And she brought her 18-year-old daughter, Susanna, her eldest, who spoke Spanish and had a certain amount of aplomb. And they were able to see people, and within not very long, Letelier and others were released and were able to get out of the country. So it was a powerful example of how diplomatic missions, both open and sub rosa, were able to get information out that the dictatorship was attempting to suppress. And it was a great example, one of the first that I experienced, of seeing what Amnesty International could do that would actually change policy.
Yeah, that's a great example. And now there's a socialist president in Chile, so things have changed.
Yes, they have.
Yes, they
That's the
have
beauty
indeed,
of
of
it.
course.
History keeps changing,
It does.
sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Yeah, I'd love to go to Chile now. So many of us, this is an interesting point too, because many of us have a very positive view of Costa Rica because we see it as a country for peace with no army. And yet you brought up something that I've never heard of before, and that is how the indigenous people are treated in Costa Rica and how their rights have been uh, pretty much taken away or they've never had them, and how it's a constant struggle. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this side of Costa Rica that we don't hear.
Yeah, it's a good point. A very good point, Georgia, that Chile has earned an image of being a democracy,
In
of
Costa
being,
Rica.
Costa Rica has earned that. And not just when Arias, the Nobel laureate, was president, but really throughout its history, it's been a bastion of democracy, in addition to being a tropical paradise.
Mhm.
And so it enjoys Euro and eco-tourism. There's a very active expatriate community in San Jose, and there are many, many wonderful things about Costa Rica. But one of the things that isn't wonderful about it is that it has shown a willingness to effectively accept or accede to the persecution and invasion of the territories of the indigenous peoples of Costa Rica. There is a valley there called the Taraba Valley from the Taraba River, where a number of indigenous tribes, including the Bribri and Bruran, have suffered death threats, murders, arson attacks, gang attacks, and these are all orchestrated by private groups trying to take over territory which by law belongs to the indigenous people exclusively. So these interlopers and intruders have killed the leaders of these tribes. Starting in 2012, the attacks have really intensified. And the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has issued protective orders for four of the indigenous leaders, and two of them have been killed since then, and another one shot and grievously wounded, and the other one, Pablo Sivas, has been subjected to an arson attack on his home. It burned his home down, and he's under constant threat of death from these private groups. And the government has literally done nothing. I contacted them on behalf of the Forest Peoples Program 5 years ago, and I've been trying to sustain a dialogue with the government, both at the judicial level and the administrative level. And only since then, there has been one prosecution, only one. There was no meaningful investigation into the crimes that were committed until a pregnant mother came forward and identified the murderer of Jerry Rivera. And that man has been arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to 22 years in prison. And it's, as far as I can tell, it is the first time that a non-Indigenous offender has been prosecuted for a crime against Indigenous people in Costa Rica. So that shows you that it's not the first crime committed, but it is the first prosecution. And it's a reflection that the government isn't directly involved in these attacks, but has simply acquiesced to them, has not taken the necessary steps to prevent these people from acting with impunity. And this first case is a breakthrough, but it's only the beginning.
And hopefully it is a beginning. So, do you know who any of these private groups are that are terrorizing the indigenous people?
Well, some of them are timber interests. Some of them are farmers and want to build farm cooperatives there for non-Indigenous. And some of them, I think, are just thugs hired by these private interests to carry out these attacks. But Juan Varela, who was the person prosecuted, was the first one named by the government as a perpetrator.
Good. Now, I want to ask you about a woman that you write about quite a bit in your book from South Africa, Lillian Ngoyi. You want to tell us a little bit about her and her struggle?
I I first heard about Lillian Ngoyi, who was the leader, one of the two leaders, along with Helen Joseph, of the women's movement to end apartheid in South Africa. She was born in 1911, and she was active starting when in the 50s, when the past laws which governed the movement and participation of non-whites in South Africa were extended to women. And Helen Joseph and Lillian Ngoyi staged a march on Pretoria with 20,000 women, the largest march in South African history. And Lillian was a great speaker, an orator. She developed all these skills, even though she came from poverty and lived in poverty all her life. And finally, they saw that she had become a leader in the ANC, the African National Congress, and in the women's branch, and they started arresting her. She took her first action by simply walking into the European entrance to the European section of the Johannesburg post office, and for that she was arrested in violation of the racial separation laws. And she was imprisoned briefly, then she was out, she was imprisoned again, and finally they just started imposing what was known as banning orders on Lillian. And she had 3 consecutive 5-year banning orders, which placed her essentially in house arrest. She couldn't leave her property. She couldn't meet with more than one person at a time. She couldn't attend any public events, speak, or belong to any organization. And so she was completely isolated. And this story touched me and moved me a great deal because my first inclination to become involved in Amnesty was because I was concerned about the problem of isolation. And the answer to isolation is solidarity. if you look at the origins of the modern human rights movement, it originated as a reaction to the Holocaust and World War II, where Gypsies and Jews and Slavs were isolated, and there was no safe constituency to help them. So it had to come from abroad. Well, that's still the case in many places, and one of them was South Africa, where uh, lawyers and others who stood up for the prisoners would themselves be in prison. So Amnesty International played a key role. And I actually had a meeting with the South African ambassador to the United States, Donald Belsol at the time. It was a very difficult meeting. And I asked him why a woman in her 60s who posed absolutely no threat to South African security was being isolated and essentially imprisoned in her own home for the third 5-year period. And he just stared at me. But shortly after that, she died while still under the banning order. And I attended a memorial for her at the chapel of the UN Church Center in New York. And it's an unforgettable event, which I describe in the book,
Right.
because Hugh Masekela came, the jazz trumpeter and vocalist and composer, and he had composed a dirge, a threnody for her, and it was so beautiful. It just seared that memory into my soul, and in the soul of everyone there. And William Sloane Coffin, who was a great speaker, spoke there, and it caused me to take even greater interest in her after she had passed away than I had before she died. And fortunately now, um, there is a biography being developed of her so that more people will know about her, because she's a forgotten hero of the anti-apartheid movement. It wouldn't have been the same without her.
Thank you for that. I was very interested in that in your book, and you wrote about it beautifully, and you wrote about her beautifully. Um,
Thank you.
I'd like you to touch a little bit on your experience in Sudan and Indonesia, because these are another really hot spot places with lots of dictators and lots of torture,
Yeah.
horrible things
Well, if
happened.
if we start briefly with Indonesia, almost every local chapter of Amnesty International was assigned a case of an Indonesian political prisoner. And
Mm,
I wondered why. When I was first organizing all these groups, I noticed that we each received 2 to 3 prisoner cases to work on, and every group had an Indonesian case. So I started looking into it. Why is this the case? And it turned out that in Indonesia, a coup had been staged, and which caused President Sukarno, who had been able to balance interests of both the Communist Party and the Muslim right-wing elements. But with U.S. connivance, once again, a coup was staged in which Suharto came to power and killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, including as many as 200,000 ethnic Chinese, Indonesians in a pogrom, and hundreds of thousands were imprisoned. By the time I started working on it, there were still tens of thousands of prisoners in Indonesian penal colonies 10 years after they were arrested, without trial, without charge, for simply being enemies of the so-called New Order government. And the U.S. government, particularly under Presidents Nixon and Ford, regarded Indonesia as a bastion against communism. And the specter of communism was used there to essentially install someone who was friendly to U.S. interests, both geopolitical interests and economic interests, because Indonesia is rich in oil, tin, tungsten, other things the U.S. wanted. And it just wanted an ally in Southeast Asia. And Suharto gave them that, but at the expense of hundreds of thousands of people. So in 1974, 75, I became the director of Amnesty's work on Indonesia in the United States, because I recognized that somebody had to figure out how to be of help. We weren't getting anywhere with any of the cases that were worked on by local chapters. So I started the first country coordination group in the United States on Indonesia, and I worked on that for the next few years. And we had a campaign. It was only the second campaign ever, country campaign ever launched by Amnesty International, which lasted from 76 to 77 and ended with a general amnesty and the release of 35,000 Indonesian political prisoners. And what did it was that we were able to get hearings in Congress in which we exposed the fact that these people were being held 10 years after their arrest. And the Indonesians had been able to stonewall and sanitize their image until then, but they made the mistake of denouncing Amnesty for exaggerating the number of prisoners that they were holding. And they said, no, we're not holding 55,000. We're only holding 35,000 political prisoners. And the Congressional Committee, I was there, I was a speaker at the committee hearing, and they were not amused by hearing that there were only 35,000 people being held without charge or trial, and that we had produced a document through the research that was done with the help of Benedict Anderson, a professor at Cornell's Modern Indonesia project, that turned up this intelligence document, which the CIA was fully aware of, which it was created by Intel in Indonesia, calling for the families, the children and parent and wives of the political prisoners to be relocated to these penal colonies. That was going to be their next step, was to just essentially exterminate those prisoners through starvation in internal exile. And the combination of the admission of 35,000 prisoners and the exposure of that document led the U.S. to threaten to cut off military aid to Indonesia, which caused them to announce a general amnesty and release 35,000 prisoners. So again, this campaign showed me the power of the human rights movement by exposing the truth, by engaging with governments and causing them, in this case, to blunder into admitting what they were doing after stonewalling for so long. And so again, it was a great inspiration to me and to see what we could actually accomplish just as private individuals, not specialists. And then on Sudan, my journey to Sudan began when I was working with an anti-poverty organization called Global Priorities. And Global Priorities sent me to Sudan in 2007. And I met a lot of the people who you see in the chapter. And I learned about Mahmoud Muhammad Taha, who was a reformist Muslim leader who believed in equal rights for women, who believed in minority rights, and who believed in peace and nonviolence, and therefore, of course, was hanged by the government of Sudan. And I had actually worked on his case when he was arrested in 1983, when I was still regional director of Amnesty in Los Angeles. And so I reacquainted with the Taha case when I was in Sudan, and the followers of Taha asked me to bring his story to Hollywood, where I had worked a lot with Hollywood figures when I was regional director in Los Angeles. So I did that, and eventually a Sudanese director and producer has taken over the project, and it's now the film is in the works.
Great. This is good news.
About his life.
I've got two more questions before I open it up. I didn't think I'd have this many, but I do want to get to your checklist at the end, but I wanted to ask you briefly, because you touch on it a lot in the book, the role, but first I wanted to mention the importance that you put on the emphasis on international organizations helping foreign countries that are going through dictatorships and disappearances and torture. I think, very often the people in the country would have problems actually doing something because they will be arrested. So I think this shows the importance of an organization like Amnesty International. I want you to touch a little bit on the role of music because you put a lot of emphasis on it in the book. You want to tell us a little bit about that and the movement?
Again, the organization came to life because of Joan Baez. I mean, it was music that provided the magic in our organizing. Until then, we were meeting in university settings, and a few people here and there were interested enough to join or start a group. But when Joan originally began to do concerts for Greece with Melina Mercouri, the Greek actress and chanteuse, and they did concerts together to raise consciousness about the torture in Greece. So when she came back to the US after her European tour, Joan linked up with Janetta Sagan, and Janetta persuaded her, or they agreed that Joan would do concerts. And so I would be the shill at these concerts. I would come and I would raise my hand. Joan would sing a song like Natalia Gorbanevskaya, which was a song that she wrote about a woman imprisoned in the Soviet Union. Or she would sing "Oh Freedom" or "The Partisan," and then she would talk about prisoners of conscience and political prisoners, and I would raise my hand and I would say, "But Joan, what can we do?" And then she would direct the people in the audience to sign-up tables at which they would see me again. And I would sign them up to join Amnesty and to start a group. And within just a few months, we had started 20 groups. And by the end of that year, we had started almost 50 groups in California and Oregon, all over California. And it was remarkable. And then Joan would come to regional gatherings and sing. And Mimi Farina, Dennis Farina, would come and sing. And this sort of brought everybody together. It had some of the same effect that music had on the farm workers struggle, which I also participated in. And you never went to a farm workers rally and didn't hear music. It was unthinkable. And so, and also the civil rights movement used songs like "We Shall Overcome" and other music as part of the unifying of the movement. To hear that music, to be inspired by it, you carry that away. And I've always found that you can't organize people purely through the mind. You have to reach their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've reached somebody's heart, you've made a friend. You've inspired them. And Joan is a very inspiring singer. And then, of course, years later, John G. Healy, who was executive director, recruited U2 and Bruce Springsteen and others to do concerts all over the world to celebrate the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And again, music became sort of the vector through which these ideas found a home. The first time human rights could be discussed openly in Hungary was at an Amnesty International concert there. Same thing in India. So yes, music is crucial. And one of the great moments for me was at Highlander Center, which I mentioned before, when I was able to get the people who ran it, who were bluegrass musicians, to do an impromptu concert for the prison ministers who were there. And it was a very moving moment at which the power of music to bring joy to people who were exhausted by their work and facing, a flood of executions that were just about to occur. They knew these death row inmates the way pastors know people who have confided their secrets in hopes of salvation. So they had a personal feeling, not only about the death row inmates, but about the families of the victims. And so it was a great thing to see them dancing and singing and smiling, because music has that magic.
It brings up another idea for me because one of the things I don't like about demonstrations are the slogans that people yell out, like, what do we want? When do we want? I just really have a reaction to hating those things. Because again, you point out, these are from the mind, they're not
Yeah.
heartfelt. They're
Yeah.
not from the heart. And the songs are from the heart. And that's such a difference to get rid of these slogans and really sing songs that have meaning to people. So, as a former professional musician, I definitely relate to that. Also worked with Mimi Farina actually a long time ago. So now I just want to bring something up, and I only will have you comment it out if you want, because we're late for getting to audience questions. But you mentioned right at the beginning of your book, um, it's kind of a checklist of learning objectives. And I'm just going to run through them. Assess the human right issue in your community or the human rights issue in your communities. Design an approach, evaluate the changes as they come about, investigate avenues of engagement with other organizations, and identify qualities shared by other human rights activists. And I think this could apply, this checklist could apply to any activist campaign.
I think really the reason that I focused it so much on looking at the human rights movement as something that could apply to your own life
Mhm.
and to your own community, and not think of it as something that happens far away. Um, uh, Eleanor Roosevelt has a wonderful quote. She said, "Where do international human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they don't appear on any maps of the world. But if human rights do not have meaning there, they have little meaning everywhere." And so that to me, and especially now with the rise of fascism in our country and the imposition of this anti-democratic administration, it's even more important now than it was when I wrote that checklist for people to look at what the human rights struggles are in their own community and see how it may be possible to address those human rights conditions. Think of what's happening to refugees, what's happening to migrants, what's happening to minorities, what's happening to people LGBTQ plus, what's happening to women. Every community now is facing an attack on human rights in our country.
Mhm.
And the two books that I think about all the time these days are The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, which was written in 1960 and which I read in college. And if you read that book, you will see so many parallels to what we've seen in the country as fascism has become normalized. And the other book is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, written in 2020, which shows the parallels between the caste system in the United States and those in India and Nazi Germany. And I really recommend that book to everyone because it helped me to understand how people who are poor themselves, who are struggling themselves, supported this fascist, so-called populist approach, because they in many cases hoped that it would put them in a higher caste, that it would give them access to power, which of course is folly and is a con job by a con man. And unfortunately, a lot of people hoped that this would be the solution for them, and that they wanted to identify with people who were rich and powerful and be part of that caste. And this is true of not only white people, but also people from minority communities who had hopes of raising their standing, their caste. And I really recommend that book also to anyone who wants to see race and class in a different context, one that I think is very revealing.
And I want to add one book to that. Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism. Even though it was written in the 50s, everything she writes about looks exactly like where our country is going right now. So
Yeah.
I'm going to try and put all those books. I forgot the first one you mentioned.
The Rise and Fall of the Third
Oh,
Reich.
sure, I read that long ago too. Okay, I'll put those in the chat box. And in the meantime, if there's anybody who would like to ask a question, make a comment for David, this would be the time to do it. Ben, go ahead.
Okay, I'm very happy to see you, Mr. Hinkley. I hope you've read some of my material. Maybe that's where you know my name from.
Yeah.
But I'm in the right place. My wife has been a member, a dues-paying member of Amnesty International almost since I met her years ago, decades ago, and that's just been a long-standing commitment that I think a lot of people were affected in that generation by the idea of that we could kind of clean up the world a little bit and make it less brutal. And I've just you brought something to mind when you talked about this idea of how a challenging ruling elite, the kind of the new ruling elite that's challenging the establishment elite, is offering to certain parts of the population the opportunity to join the white club. And I know this for a fact because I did the 2000 uh, uh, census from door to door around the community. And here in Sonoma. So I got, into places I would never have seen if I hadn't actually had to come up and track people down. And one of the things that I noticed was that they have a box where you can designate if you're white, Hispanic, or Hispanic. So they're trying to create a white category. So lots of Latinos, particularly, have been here for a long time, identify with the idea of being with the who's ever on top, have disdain maybe for their poorer, less, well funded or resourced neighbors who are recent immigrants. And so they have been pulled up, and the government's actually giving them a checkbox to say you're now white. Mm-hmm. I thought I did not expect that. I thought that's the cleverest thing I think I've seen from the Trump administration. Free white cards to the right kind of people.
And it's the abolition of brown, Ben.
Right. Well, brown is always the other. So the further you are from brown, and I know from some of my favorite entertainers, there's a Turkish American Twitch streamer, Hassan Piker, who's recently gotten into trouble with the ADL. But he always talked about, he said, when I'm in America, I pass as white. He says, I'm a Southern California white boy here in Los Angeles. He says, the thing that worries him about the Trump administration, he said, maybe I'm not quite white enough for them because there's that hyphenated Americanism. So he said, for him, he realizes white is a movable feast. It's wherever the people in power want it to sit. And I just wanted to add that little commentary into that.
Thank you, Ben. And I'm a great admirer of yours. I associate you with the principle of economic justice and the idea that people should have a living wage,
right,
and that they shouldn't have to work for peanuts all their lives while the people they're working for get richer and richer. And I admire what you've done all your career.
Well, I appreciate that. And that has been work I've done in concert with others like Marty Bennett here. We did the living wage ordinances around the county. And that just turned out to be the high water mark of my career is passing the living wage ordinances. But it feels like, okay, that's points on the board. I'll take the W. I'll take it.
All right.
It's a great achievement, Ben. It's a great achievement.
Does someone else want to say anything? Go ahead, Mike. Oh, he's got the balloons again.
I don't know why that happened. I have no idea how that happens. No idea.
Okay.
But it's very enjoyable. I love the music thing that you talked about. It's so fantastic. But really great today. Just fascinating. Everything you talked about. I guess just a quick question. which and then just one other quick question, and this is: have you ever? I just heard about this recently. A book called "From Dictatorship to Democracy" by a guy named Gene Sharp.
No,
Ever
it's
heard
new
of
to
any?
me.
Gene
Okay,
That's
Sharp.
new to me.
I don't know, because he gives all these like a whole mess of things you can do. Anyway, and but generally, and this is a serious question. What how bad do you think what's happening right now is going to be? My wife is having an absolute fit every day. We talk about all kinds of options, about maybe even getting out of here, or God knows what. She grew up under a dictatorship, and so I'm just wondering, seriously. I mean, what's happening? A lot of people don't believe it, but I'm believing it more and more and more every day. The more I see, and it's so hideous and contentious. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how bad you think this is going to get right now over the next 3.5 years.
I think it's horrible, Mike. I just think it's horrible. I think that, the philosophy is flood the zone. You've heard that term. It's a fire hose of challenges to democracy, to justice, to freedom, to human rights. And it's very clear that it's motivated by a philosophy of white supremacy, and it's a fascist movement. And if it were only Trump, it would be bad enough, but it's not. And it's horrible, partly because they have all three branches of government in sway. So I can't say how bad it will get, but it scares me, honestly. What I'm encouraged by is that we do have resistance from the courts. We do have resistance from states' attorney generals. We do have resistance from people, even though the media, which is the handmaiden of corporations, won't cover it. But there are demonstrations going on, the No Kings demonstrations. These are very important beginnings. I mean, many people are back on the ramparts. A lot of the people I see in those demonstrations are my age, which is a little discouraging, but I don't think it'll be that way indefinitely. I think what we're seeing, the attacks on universities, the attacks on the idea of knowledge, of science, of truth, of expertise, of management of crises. I mean, attacking FEMA. What? Who benefits? I mean, it's so obvious now to anyone who's paying attention who the beneficiaries are of these invidious policies. And the thing that gives me hope is that it's actually a pretty small group of people that are really benefiting compared with all the people that are suffering from this and are going to suffer. One of the things that breaks my heart, Mike, is that it's not just us, it's the world. When Trump attacked USAID, he killed people. He killed them. There are people going to die today, tomorrow, the next day because of that. I talk to people who work with NGOs on the ground in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, who are desperate to see how to fill the gap, the vacuum that's being created by the cutting off of these life-saving for children. I mean, so many of these things benefit children, and you have to be completely without compassion to think that these policies are somehow a good idea. There's nothing good about it. In fact, I would say that the hallmark of this administration is cruelty. If you want to know one thing that is a through line to every policy initiative, every executive order, it's cruelty. Cruelty to the environment and all the animals and creatures who live in it, cruelty to the future, to their own children and grandchildren who are going to have to face the crises caused by global warming. And all of these people that are dying and are going to die because of these policies, I think that's horrible. And so I feel like the counter effort is urgent. It can't wait for a tipping point. It can't wait for the by-election. It has to begin and continue and grow, and that will determine how bad it gets.
You know, you mentioned something that I think is very important for people to know, and that is the state's attorneys general who are
Yeah,
really fighting back. They're very well organized. I get emails from them almost every day.
me
And
too.
they're really worth supporting because they're fighting it. So
Yeah, it's very inspiring to see.
I was very happy to see that. It's like they've, as a group, they realize this. I mean, there's another group that might step up, and I haven't thought about it or heard about it, but it's the mayors of the country. You know, there's some organization of the mayors, and they have stepped up a lot of times when there are things happening. Not this,
Including some from so-called red states.
yeah.
You know, people forget this red state, blue state thing is really obnoxious because there are good people, there are people with hearts and souls everywhere in every state. And I hate to see them lumped in with the electoral majority in their states.
Well,
Because we're one country and we have to stand together, those of us who still believe in democracy. And I know a number of people in my family are Republicans,
mm,
but they're appalled by what they see. They can't even talk about it anymore.
mm.
They never signed up for this. They didn't sign up for the fascist party. They believe in fiscal conservatism, but they don't believe in separating children from their families and sending citizens to Libya and South Sudan. I think it's the very extreme quality of these measures that will eventually backfire and have begun to backfire. And here's to the ACLU, which I once worked for, trying to stop an execution here in California, for standing up and litigating, because litigation is going to be one of the crucial measures. And I think we may have to look for the first time in a long time at a national strike
Yeah, I think you're
because it with this level of attack and assault on democracy, that is not too extreme a measure.
I agree. I think, you know, when you brought up about the red state, blue state dichotomy here, Bernie certainly got past that. I mean, he went to all these so-called red states, found thousands of people who wanted to hear the message, just, you know, mowed right over that dichotomy, and I think did it brilliantly with AOC.
Yeah. Well, we
This,
have to do it. We have to
yeah,
talk to each other.
yeah, we
We have
do.
to find a common ground. You're not going to find many people who identify as Republicans who are fond of seeing children sent away from their mothers.
Yeah, that was horrific. That whole thing was just kind of unbelievable. But this has been so exciting today, David. I really appreciate your taking time with us, and you're so articulate and knowledgeable. It's really an enjoyable to hear you.
Thanks very much,
And I want to
Georgia.
bring the book up again, Stories of Solidarity and Struggle, which readers' books will have. If they don't have it yet, they will get it. And I want to recommend it because it's inspiring and it's the kind of information we need. Most of us who are activists really need to understand this, be inspired by the good things that are accomplished, like that Amnesty International has been able to do, and learn from as well. So I want to thank those of you who've been with us live and the people who will hear it tonight, because everyone will get the recording of this evening. So thank you again, David. I'm going to stop the recording, but you know, some of us will stay on for a little bit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really